Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive, an expert audit really, into one of the most spectacular police failures in American history, the Zodiac investigation. For decades, you've probably heard the official story, right? Local cops doing their absolute best but ultimately outmatched by a lone madman. But what happens when we contrast those official findings with the deeply suppressed leads from independent researchers? What if his codes were never actually meant to be solved by local police, because doing so would expose a highly classified operation?
Just listen to this specific translation from the infamous Z340 Cipher. It reads, "I now have enough flavs to work for me." Wow. That completely flips our whole understanding of this case. Instead of some lone wolf just leaving breadcrumbs for the police to dutifully find, what if we're dealing with something else entirely? What if these ciphers weren't clues designed to be solved, but rather calculated warnings that local authorities were literally never meant to understand?
To really grasp why this alternative hypothesis even exists, we need to audit the timeline. It kicks off in December 1968 with the precise, almost clinical murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Then, by the summer of '69, the violence escalates and those theatrical letters start pouring in. But then, after a really tight cluster of terrifying crimes and a final confirmed letter in 1974, just nothing. The most famous unsolved serial killer case in American history simply stops. What follows isn't just your standard cold case, it's an absolute, across-the-board institutional failure by law enforcement.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of that failed investigation. The official police narrative has rigidly stuck to 5 confirmed victims and this standard lone serial killer theory. Meanwhile, deeply suppressed independent leads point to a staggering 37 victims and a highly compartmentalized behavior profile. It becomes pretty obvious that the standard, localized police narrative just couldn't handle these glaring anomalies.
Which brings us to Section 1, the anomalies in the room. Specifically, why naval intelligence?
Seriously? Ask yourself, why on earth were local detectives suddenly sharing evidence with the military in the summer of 1969? This detail was entirely suppressed from press briefings at the time. I mean, naval intelligence had absolutely zero obvious jurisdiction over a state-level California homicide. Yet, their cryptographers were quietly placed right there in the room with these murder codes.
Let's methodically break down the physical evidence of the 3 primary ciphers to try and make sense of this sudden military interest. The Z48 was sent in July 1969 and cracked in just 1 week by a high school teacher and his wife. It was almost like a distraction. But the Z340 and the Z13, now those represent a completely different, almost staggering level of encryption.
51 years. Think about that for a second. That is how long it took for the Z340 cipher to finally be cracked. The FBI couldn't do it. The CIA, the NSA, top-tier university math departments, they all failed. It actually took a private team using modern computing tools 51 years to finally break it open in December 2020.
And when they finally did crack it, this is the text they uncovered. I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. It's highly theatrical, mocking, taunting. But analysts now believe this dramatic visible layer was actually a decoy, constructed to conceal a secondary, military-grade encoding beneath it, something a local California police precinct had literally zero chance of recognizing.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. The Z13, a warning, not a clue.
13. Just 13 characters long. This is the most terrifying and untouched piece of evidence in the whole case. This final unsolved cipher was mailed alongside a piece of victim Paul Stein's bloodied shirt. The killer sent it with a note specifically claiming that these 13 characters held his true identity, and has sat in an evidence file for over 50 years, never officially cracked and never officially explained. I want you to consider the psychology behind this for a moment. What kind of man constructs an unsolvable code and explicitly tells you it contains his exact name? Is that a man who desperately wants to be caught? Or is it a man who knows, with absolute certainty, that he is entirely protected and will never be found?
This brings us to Section 3, Project Artichoke and the MK Ultra connection.
To understand the wider canvas here, we have to look at MK Ultra. Based on declassified documents, this was a highly classified psychological arms race program launched back in 1953. One of its central, stated institutional goals was the creation of untraceable killers, individuals who could be induced to perform acts they wouldn't normally do, triggered, deployed, and completely disavowed. This is exactly the kind of shadow operation that would render a standard local police homicide investigation completely useless.
Now, what's really interesting about this overlapping timeline is the context. 1969 wasn't just the year of the Zodiac. It was a peak era for the Vietnam War and the Manson murders. Whistleblowers and researchers point out that black-budget programs like Operation Chaos and Project Artichoke were highly active during this exact window. Then, in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the bulk of MKUltra records intentionally shredded. The only reason we know any of this today is because 7 misfiled boxes somehow survived in a forgotten records room.
So looking at all this, independent forensic psychologists have arrived at a pretty chilling alternative hypothesis. Could the Zodiac have actually been a government asset? Could he have been a product of one of these heavily protected behavioral modification programs? When independent experts really analyze the killer's mind, they see a highly compartmentalized profile. The differences are night and day. The actual killings were clinical, methodical, and detached. He left absolutely no prints, no DNA, no witnesses. But the letters? They were incredibly theatrical, mocking, and totally desperate for public acknowledgement. This stark difference between silent precision on one hand and dramatic flair on the other is the absolute hallmark of a mind deliberately split between function and performance.
So, the crucial point is what happens next. Section 4. 37 claims and burying the investigation. In a 1971 letter, the killer made a massive, bold claim. He stated he had 37 victims. Now think about the math on that. If there are only 5 officially confirmed victims, that suggests 32 unacknowledged hits that slipped right past the authorities. What if those 5 confirmed murders were just the visible ones, specifically designed to generate headlines, while the other 32 were actually covert operations?
This is where the official investigation actively turned on its own. Detectives and independent researchers who actually chased these suppressed anomalies paid a really heavy price. SFPD Inspector Dave Toschi, criminologist Robert Graysmith, and criminologist Gareth Penn all found their credibility fiercely attacked. Their careers were disrupted, and their most compelling evidence was methodically buried in endless bureaucratic procedure, all just to protect the official, localized narrative. And all of this leads us to the most chilling, independent conclusion regarding that sudden, eerie silence that fell over the case in 1974. The killer didn't simply vanish because he grew old, died, or got careless. The operation stopped because whoever was managing him decided the assignment was officially over.
Which leaves us with this final, truly haunting thought. 50 years of institutional silence feels a lot less like incompetence and a whole lot more like a calculated decision. The killer warned the world that his final cipher contained his true identity. So I have to ask you, is that final cipher officially unsolved because no one has found the answer, or because someone already has? It completely changes how we view police history, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning what you're told.